One of the trends that I've been talking about for quite a while now is that while the United States is effectively the only country that on a global level taxes its citizens no matter where they live, subjects them to regulations, makes them report their bank accounts, etc. More countries are starting to do that, but I believe that the trend is more countries will do it in a more bold way. More countries in the Western world will increasingly demand their citizens who live overseas, particularly in tax havens, to pay money to a country they don't live in. And as someone who comes from the United States and has seen this from the inside of my own life, I want to share 3 different things that you should be aware of if your country does this. If you're Canadian, if you're Australian, if you're British, whatever the case may be, 3 things to think about and how to prepare for this possibility. Hey guys, I'm Andrew Henderson, and here at Nomad Capitalist, we work with 7 and 8 and higher figure entrepreneurs and investors who want to legally go where they're treated best, whether it's moving their businesses overseas, to pay less than 54 cents on the dollar in tax, far less, protect themselves and their families and their freedom with second citizenship, invest in new markets with a lot of potential, fewer regulations. You can learn more about all that at nomadcapitalist.com. But I've been talking about how so many people have kind of laughed at the United States. I've had friends from Europe, for example, who used to laugh at me for being an American and having to file a tax return every year to a country I didn't live in and actually never even visited for a single day in many years. I had to report. Now, there were ways that I could legally pay nothing or very little to the United States. But it was still a hassle, and there were a lot of restrictions on me and on my business, and I still have American friends who deal with those restrictions every day. But I think that those people may not want to laugh so quickly, because what I've been telling you for a while now is that I think other countries, whether it's France or Australia or Canada or China is now starting to do it in Hong Kong, South Africa has talked about it, there may be more, are going to start coming after their citizens living overseas, particularly those who choose to do what we talk about and go and live in very tax favorable countries, whether that's living in Dubai, living in Bangkok, living in Panama, living in Monaco, whatever it may be. Because the political will of people who increasingly feel marginalized in the West is that the evil rich need to pay more. Now, it doesn't matter that half the people in the United States, for example, don't pay a single penny in federal income tax. None of these facts actually matter. What matters is the emotions of the masses are dictating that if you're wealthy, they don't want you to have the option to leave. And now they're starting to even say that if you're Canadian, for example, and you go and live in Monaco, that how dare you have the opportunity to be Canadian and to be able to come back or change your mind when you want or to retire in Canada, whatever the case may be. They don't understand that you're not entitled to all the full benefits of living in Canada if you don't, but they don't like the fact that you get to travel around as a Canadian and avoid paying the piper the way that they think they do, even though many of them don't actually pay very much in tax. And so that's increasingly politically popular. Countries in the West are saying, you're not Canadian, you're not one of us, we don't bleed the same maple syrup blood. This is a business transaction, and if you don't want to pay your tithe, you can't be one of us. There's a couple things I want you to keep in mind if your country were to say that in coming years. 3 things that you should be aware of. Number 1 is the first thing that your country may require you to do is very simply to pay taxes on your worldwide income. So again, in this scenario, you're Canadian, you're Australian, you're French, you're Swedish, whatever the case may be. You say, you know what, I'm tired of living in this country and paying the ridiculous rates. I run an e-commerce business. I'm going to move that to Dubai, move that to Panama, move that to whatever tax-friendly country I can. I'm going to go and live in a tax-friendly country, and I'm going to basically follow my tax-friendly quadrant where personally and on a business level, you're going to move out of your high-tax country and move both of those, business and personal, into a low-tax country. And if you do that right now, you can basically live, very tax-optimally. But what I think that they'll say is, number 1, maybe you could just, some countries will say, we're adopting US style taxation, you have to just pay us. Now the United States does allow exemptions where you can exclude the first about $120,000 a year at a maximum in some cases. If you're married, you could potentially double that. So if you've got a small business, you can pay relatively little tax on that. Above that, you can now pay a reduced rate. Right? So you may not pay 50%, but you might pay 5 or 10 or 12 or something like that. Okay? So your country can implement a system like that where you've still got to file a tax return, you've still got to pay some kind of rate. Or what they may do is say, there's going to be a minimum tax. So there's a thing in the United States on the corporate level called GILTI, which basically sets a floor. A lot of countries have similar provisions if you're engaging in things like transfer pricing, moving money internationally. But long story short, what a country might say is everyone who's a French citizen must pay 11% worldwide. And if you're not paying 11% in Dubai or wherever else, they may force you to pay it. Now, if you're making millions of dollars a year, that's a lot of money to pay to a country you don't even live in. And if you're like me, in the case of my former country, I didn't even want to go there. I don't want to drive on the roads. I don't want to send my kids to the school. I don't want anything to do with you guys, just on a personal level. But regardless of your reasons, even if you say that, they may say, well, listen, everyone's going to pay 11%. It's only fair. You're going to see more of that. Okay. So there's going to be, whether it's just all out, you have to pay. Maybe there's some exclusions, maybe there's some exceptions, that could be an issue. Now, what they could also do is say, what you're starting to see right now with China, people who are Chinese living in Hong Kong, no longer are they letting Chinese mainlanders in Hong Kong benefit from the low tax policies of Hong Kong. No, they're going to say, you pay us. The same way decades ago, the French government got together and said, okay, French can leave and go live somewhere else, but not Monaco. Right? You can't go there. Colombia said, you can't go to Panama. Other countries, I think Turkey even had some restrictions on going to certain places like Belize, if I remember correctly. You could have more countries doing things like that where they're going to limit where you can go. Are they going to say that if you're Swedish, you can't move to Australia and pay Australian taxes? Probably not. But if you want to move somewhere and go where you're treated best because you don't believe that if you make $5 million a year, that paying $2 million in taxes is more than your fair share for roads and bridges, then they're going to limit that and they're going to make you pay something potentially. And the second thing that you should be aware of is the filing obligations. This is sometimes where things get messy because there were a lot of years that for me in the United States, again, I paid zero or very, very little. And it was all done legally because I was overseas and I was using the laws to my advantage the way many expats do and many expat entrepreneurs do. But the obligation was still you have to file. What do you have to file as an American living overseas? Well, if you have a foreign company, you've got to file a form for that. If you have a U.S. company and you're overseas, you may have to file a form for that. If you've got bank accounts overseas, you may have to file a form reporting all those bank accounts. In fact, the penalties for not filing these forms are extremely high in the United States, and they can often be complicated. Now, I lived in very tax favorable countries that left me alone. So all I had to deal with was the United States. But imagine now you have your home country plus a new country, even if they don't tax you a lot. Now you've got two systems fighting. You've got tax returns in one, tax credits, tax treaties. It gets really a mess. It's hard to say, I'm leaving France, I'm moving to, Vanuatu, and I can just forget the French system and focus only on the Vanuatu system, which leaves me alone. It becomes difficult. On top of that, imagine every bank account has to be reported. And what I found is I would sometimes lose my debit card and they would give me a new debit card with a new account number and I'd have to go through and keep track of which account number was when and what was the balance. It became really complicated to do. And so even if you don't have a huge tax obligation, let's say that your country implements this kind of system, maybe you go and live in a country with lower taxes but not zero, maybe you skate by. The form filling, the bureaucracy still could be an issue. And so that's certainly something where, I had situations where we had clients who, if they were going to stay a U.S. citizen and implement the plan that was best for them, it was going to cost them $40,000 or $50,000 a year just in tax compliance. Plus, if you've ever done that level of tax compliance, you know that you're pulling your hair out because you're always pushing the people to get the job done faster. You're always worried it won't get done on time. You want to make sure everything's done properly. It's a headache on top of just paying all the money. And that could be something that could really be a problem for people. Number 3 is simply restrictions on your freedom to invest, freedom to bank, freedom to do what you want with your money. Americans don't have access to certain cryptocurrency investments, certain cryptocurrency exchanges. They don't have access to certain investments overseas. There are certain bank accounts that I have that I make investments in that a U.S. citizen or U.S. green card holder cannot make those investments. You are restricted. One of the banks that I deal with, they don't allow anyone who's a European tax resident to buy into certain investments. That's partially because of regulations, but if you see more worldwide tax initiatives from countries, I think you're going to see more investment opportunities give away. Because here's the truth, and you don't see this if you live in the West. China, Russia, the Arab world, increasingly the Latin American world, you see a lot of people in emerging countries who have a lot of wealth. We've worked with a number of them. And they are afraid. They don't trust their countries. They're looking for great investment opportunities. They're looking for great banks. They will go and they'll be welcomed by many of the banks and many of the investment houses, many of the whatever. And if you're a Westerner it's just going to become too difficult to deal with you with all the regulations in your country, potentially new tax initiatives in your country. And a lot of banks, especially the good ones, and a lot of investments are just going to say it's not worth it. We'll just take all the Chinese money, or we'll just take all the Arabs' money, or we'll just take all the Mexicans' money who are leaving and want a safe place. And it's just not worth it to deal with the Dutch. I mean, how many Dutch are there, right? I mean, we'd love to take their money, but it's just not feasible for us, and we don't need it that badly. And you'll see more of that. You'll see fewer options. You'll see fewer safe havens available. That's why what I talk about is tunnels. If you can open a bank account now that's affordable, even if you don't have an exact need for it, do it. If you can get a second residence permit now that's cheap, do it. If you can get a second passport now, build your tunnels. I think everyone who's successful needs a second passport. I hear people saying if you're not American, you don't need one. I've talked about that before. More countries are going to come down on wealthy people. They're going to have wealth taxes. They're going to tax income at a higher and higher level. They're going to make it more difficult to leave their tax system. You may just want to leave their system entirely at some point. And so having an insurance policy now while it's more affordable is going to be a good idea. Imagine that France comes out and says, no matter where you live in the world, you've got to pay tax. How many French people live overseas or would like to live overseas when they raise the tax rates again? Who would like to get a second passport and just expatriate from France and be done with the place? Is that going to raise the price of second citizenship? Who knows? But what I see is more and more demand for all these services, and having an insurance policy now is not a bad idea. You don't have to get a second citizenship by investment. You can get what I call a paper residence permit, where you just sit around and you wait for a couple years to get your passport. You can check your family tree. You can make investments in certain countries to get citizenship. You can start with a residence permit. There's many different ways you can protect yourself, but I believe that being a citizen of some Western countries in the next 10 years is not all it's going to be cracked up to be. And I know that by reading policy papers from these people. I listen to some of the extreme members of Parliament and of Congress where policy is progressively moving towards. I think that these are three things you need to keep in mind if you are a Western citizen and not an American. Leave your comments below. What do you think? What are you doing to prepare? I want to hear from you on this very important issue. How can Nomad Capitalist help you? 4 ways. Number 1, subscribe to our channel and click the notification bell to make sure you get our new video every day. Number 2, get a copy of Nomad Capitalist, the book. You'll learn a lot of my personal experiences over a dozen years of studying this stuff, as well as exactly some of the strategies that you can use to build your Nomad Capitalist plan. Number 3, if you're not sure where to start, but you want to come and learn from my team and I, you want to come and mingle with like-minded people, learn more about our live conference, Nomad Capitalist Live. It's coming up soon. And number 4, if you want some help right now because you've got a burning issue, you need something solved, you want to lower your taxes, get a second passport, or build the Nomad Capitalist lifestyle of your dreams, go to nomadcapitalist.com and click on Become a Client.